Okay, so we'll get started now. Hi, everyone. My name is Lou Jane Altawara. I'm a program associate at the Center for Creative Land Recycling. We are a technical assistance provider for EPA Regions 9 and 10. So thank you all for joining. To be honest, you should apply for a targeted brownfield assessment webinar. We're really excited to have you all here with us. Just to go over some housekeeping, as you'll see in the bottom of your screen, there's both a chat box and a Q&A box. Please place any comments you have in the chat box and any questions you may have throughout the webinar in the Q&A box. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end to go through any questions that you may have. And now I'll pass it off to the lovely Cheryl Gonzalez, who is a senior brownfield consultant at CClear. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou Jane. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us with the TBA webinar. Next slide, please. Our presenters today include Lisa Hanusiak, Brownfields Project Manager from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Region 9, Marion Gushigan, who's Vice President of Real Estate Development in Hawaii for EHH Housing, Jasmine Williams, who's the Brownfields Project Manager from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Region 9, and Florence Kabwasa Green, Capital Improvements Manager for the County of Monterey, California. And myself, I'm a Senior Brownfields Consultant for the Center for Creative Land Recycling, and my name is Cheryl Gonzalez. Thank you again for joining. Next slide. Today, we're going to be talking several things. One is I'll give you a brief overview of CClear. We'll get kind of a quick brownfield understanding. Jasmine will go into the EPA resources that are available with a focus then from Lisa on the targeted brownfield assessment, or a TBA. And then we're really thrilled to also have Marion Gushigan and Florence Kabwasa Green that'll be talking about their successful projects. Then we'll leave some time for questions and answers. Next slide. So today's key takeaways are you'll learn about a targeted brownfield assessment, the activities that are performed under a TBA, eligibility requirements, the application process, reasons to apply, and key factors for a successful application. Next slide. The Center for Creative Land Recycling, or CClear, is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to promote the sustainability, equitable, and responsible reuse of underutilized and environmentally impacted properties. We do this through education, advocacy, technical assistance, and we convene stakeholders to revitalize communities through land recycling. CClear is US EPA's technical assistance to brownfields, or a TAB provider, and we are responsible for Region 9 and Region 10, which includes 8 US states and numerous territories. And we're also California's DTSC's Brownfield Technical Assistance provider for the Equitable Community Revitalization Grant Program. Next slide. So this is a map that shows you all of the various tabs that are located throughout the United States. And CClear is, again, the tab provider for Regions 9 and 10. And that includes, in Region 9, Nevada, California, Arizona, Hawaii, and the Pacific Island territories. And Region 10 includes Idaho, Washington, Oregon, and Alaska. Next slide. So real simply, what is a brownfield? It's a underutilized or abandoned property with known or perceived contamination. EPA estimates that there is 450,000 brownfields covering over 15 million acres throughout the United States. Next slide. Typical brownfield sites that you might find in a city or a town include gas stations, dry cleaners, manufacturing industrial sites, abandoned mine sites, train yards, military facilities, or abandoned vacant lots. Next slide. Brownfields have numerous negative impacts that include public and environmental health, property values, tax bases, divestment, crime, can increase public costs, invites illegal dumping, and it also includes a lack of economic development and job loss, as well as being an eyesore and diminishing the community pride. Next slide. When a brownfield site is pivoted to a reuse and reinvestment occurs, the community benefits include improved health and wellness for the community and the environment, can increase the tax base, facilitates job growth, and it's an opportunity to utilize existing infrastructure, and it improves community pride. Next slide. Now I'd like to invite Lisa and Jasmine, invite them to talk more about EPA resources and the technical Brownfield assessment grants, or not grant, but technical assistance. And Jasmine will talk about the EPA resources first. Thank you, Jasmine. Next slide.
Thank you, Cheryl. EPA does provide a number of competitive funding opportunities to support brownfield assessments and cleanups to prepare a site for redevelopment. Due to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we've had an increase of $1.5 billion to the Brownfields program over a 5-year period for activities ranging from assessments to cleanups. It also supports our revolving loan fund for cleanups. Assessment grants are managed directly by the grant recipient, and this previous round of funding provided assessment funding ranging from $500,000 to $1.5 million over a 4-year period. EPA's Brownfields program also supports a number of non-competitive opportunities that also complement the goals of preparing brownfield sites for redevelopment. At this time, I'd like to invite my colleague, Lisa Hanusiak, to discuss EPA's Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program. So off to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Jasmine. Next slide, please. Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. My name's Lisa Hanusiak, and I am our lead for the Targeted Brownfields Assessment Program in Region 9, but everyone on our team would work on a Targeted Brownfields Assessment project if you are interested in applying, and we will support you. And I wanted to say that the main takeaway today, amongst all the other information, is what Jasmine said, that we have a lot of money through the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that includes funding for targeted brownfields assessments. So the one message you should carry away is, if you want to apply, if you have any idea that you might have a site that would be a good fit, do it, because we have the money now and we don't know how long we're going to be so flush with resources. So the thing about targeted brownfields assessments is this is contractor support that we oversee the contractor. So the applicant just has to submit an application and we do all the heavy lifting. We do have a process where we continually work with the applicant to determine the scope of the project, the areas of focus, reviewing deliverables, but it's really something that is not like a grant that needs to be managed, which makes it more challenging. And a targeted brownfields assessment is really focused work. So we can do phase 1 assessment, which is a records review of a property, which also we call all appropriate inquiries, which allows you to ensure that you get liability protection under the Superfund law if you have a phase 1 assessment done within a year of the property transfer. We then can move into doing a phase 2 assessment. So if the phase 1 assessment, the records review, shows that there's some sort of potential for contamination on site that may lead to exposures to people using the site, we'll go out and collect data and then analyze the data, compare the results to screening levels to see whether there's any sort of cleanup action that would be appropriate based on the results. And then the final step in the targeted brownfields assessment is we would then look at potential cleanup alternatives, various methods that may work and be effective, and we would just compare those based on effectiveness, cost, and implementability. And the nice thing about the targeted brownfields assessment is that the analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives, which we call an ABCA for short, is also something that's required for a cleanup grant application. So the great thing about a targeted brownfields assessment is we can help you with doing the assessment of the property, and then you can carry the ball to the next step, which would be potentially applying for a cleanup grant under the EPA Brownfields program. We cannot, unfortunately, do any sort of cleanup work using targeted brownfields assessment resources. It's strictly for assessment. Next slide, please. Okay, so we do have certain requirements which an application will have you answer if you choose to apply. And it's got to be a site that meets the definition of brownfield site, which Cheryl mentioned earlier. It's basically just an underutilized or vacant property where there's either actual contamination or a perception of contamination and you just may not know. So it needs to be assessed. We ask that applicants submit a signed access consent. The property owner is allowing us to go on site. We need that in order to be able to go onto the site and collect samples. The applicant cannot be responsible for the contamination at the site. And there needs to have been compliance with that all appropriate inquiries that I mentioned previously, the phase 1 assessment, that there needs to be a demonstration of protection from liability. But, you know, we can always talk to you specifically about a given site because there's always a lot of caveats and exceptions, and it really bears reviewing each property on a case-by-case basis to make sure that those requirements are satisfied. Entities that can apply for a targeted brownfield assessment include units of government, tribes, 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and so this is the difference with a grant. A grant, those first 3 are the eligible applicants, but for a targeted brownfields assessment, an eligible applicant can apply on behalf of another ineligible entity. So, for example, a privately owned property that a unit of government, maybe a city, has an interest in moving into some sort of revitalization. That city, unit of government, or tribe, or nonprofit can apply on behalf of a private property owner. Next slide, please. Okay, characteristics of a good candidate site. So we're looking at what we want is to have some sort of a site where there's an idea of a reuse, and we're neutral on what the reuse is going to be. It's really depending on what the community wants and the property owner, the site wants. But we want to have some sort of evidence that there is a plan in place because we want to work on properties where we do the assessment, maybe there needs to be a cleanup, but that we want to see the site revitalized and reused in the near term after the work is done. There needs to be some sort of a community benefit. So we wouldn't go out and do brownfields work on a privately owned property that would only have some sort of benefit to the private property owner. It needs to be a benefit for the community. We already talked about the third bullet, that the site could be either publicly owned or privately owned if an eligible applicant applies on behalf of a private owner. And then it's, you know, again, it needs to be some sort of a community benefit where there's, sorry about that, I didn't turn off my phone. Needs to be some sort of community support for whatever the eventual reuse is going to be. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and these are just what we look for. And, you know, I have to, the one other thing I want to say is all of the decisions about which sites we work on for targeted brownfield assessment are made by our team in Region 9, which is really excellent because if you apply for one of our cleanup grants or assessment grants, it's a national competition. And so the stakes are much higher. Whereas for the targeted brownfields assessment sites, our team makes the decision. And basically, if we think that the project's a good fit and we have the funding to do it, we'll go ahead and do the work. It's a really simple decision, and we can turn it around really quickly and tell you whether the site's approved or not. That being said, we always need to kind of look at the scale, because our targeted brownfields assessment resources are, they're limited, and we have a lot of area in Region 9. And so we can't assess huge sites, but we can always work with an applicant, for example, to prioritize within an extremely large site the area to focus. We're definitely looking for communities that have been historically underserved, or there are environmental justice concerns that are negatively impacting the community. And then we also like to use it as kind of an entree into the Brownfields program, that we're always looking for communities that have not received assistance yet from Brownfields. Not to say that we don't award plenty of targeted Brownfields assessments to communities that we have a long history of working with. So it's, across the board, but we're always looking to bring more communities into the program. And this is kind of a great way to get started. Next slide, please. Okay, there are certain hard no's that we have. We cannot do any Brownfields work on a listed Superfund site. There can't be federal orders against a site. We also cannot do work on property that's owned by the federal government. We could do it if, for example, the property has been transferred to another eligible entity. That would be fine. Just can't currently be owned by the federal government. And then we can always look at, if there are one of these hindrances, we can always potentially look at if there are opportunities to be flexible, and we would be happy to work with you. And, certainly if you're not sure and you're potentially interested in applying, you can always reach out to us, and we're happy to talk through details before you actually go to the trouble to filling out an application, so that we can make sure that the site would be eligible. And if not, maybe you could get a different applicant to apply. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have just some comparisons. And I'm going to talk about the TBA stuff, and then I'm going to ask Jasmine to help out with talking about the assessment stuff. So for the targeted brownfields assessment, as I mentioned previously, we accept applications year round. And as long as we have funding, we can continue to accept projects. We are on an annual government fiscal year, so we do get kind of a lump sum generally in the February-March timeframe. And if we've already committed all our funds, we can always just put the project on hold until the next time we get an infusion of money. So it's a really nice program from that perspective, that there's no hard deadlines that we're trying to meet. We need to scale the project to size. So we say that, well, we can do 100,000 as a guideline. But, honestly, now that we have all this bipartisan infrastructure law funding, we're getting bigger and bigger projects. And many of them, most of them probably exceed 100,000 in value. I can tell you that. We would provide a phase 1 assessment, a phase 2 assessment, and then the ABCA, the analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives, which then you could potentially turn around into a cleanup grant application to do cleanup work at the site after it's assessed. And then I guess the other, the major thing is, you don't have to do the hard work. We're doing the hard work because we have our contractor helping us. We're overseeing the contractor. And so really, the applicant just gets to provide input and work with us while we do all the hard work.
And then just to provide a comparison between, our competitive assessment grants versus our targeted brownfield assessments. The assessment grants are a traditional competitive grant with a fixed deadline. Typically, the notice of funding opportunity goes out. Applications are due in the November-ish timeline, and that funding wouldn't be available until the next fiscal year of October 1, typically. The opportunities that are offered vary from year to year. between our community-wide assessment programs and or our coalition assessment programs where smaller communities, nonprofits, organizations, eligible entities have the opportunity to come together to increase not only the funding amount up to 1.5 million as shown, but also it's a way to increase capacity to support a larger scale assessment goal. Additionally, as Lisa mentioned, our TBA program, Targeted Brownfield Assessment, that is work provided by EPA contractors, whereas for our assessment grants, the grant recipient does manage the grant and the procurement aspects of that grant as well. And those timelines for our assessment grants are a period of performance of 4 years in comparison to a smaller timeline for the TBA program. Next slide, please.
Okay, I'll chime in again. So we, even though it says targeted on a single site, that's true, but we also sometimes will accept and do projects where there are several sites kind of within a given area, because we get an economy of scale if we can send our contractor out to assess maybe, you know, 2 or 3 sites within a community that are nearby. So don't let that be a hindrance. If you have more than one site, you can certainly apply for more than one at a time. Because we're doing all of the contract management work, the recipient doesn't have to worry about that. Low to moderate level of investigation. I'm not really sure what that means because the thing is, you do the assessment because you don't know what you're going to find. You definitely need to have property access, and we will ask for assigned access consent right up front, because we're just not even going to review and approve an application until we have that signed access consent in hand that allows us to actually do the data collection that would be necessary for the targeted brownfields assessment. We prioritize projects, or we really accept projects that have some sort of near-term reuse. Near-term being flexible, I mean, certainly redevelopment can take some time, so it's not that we can certainly hold anyone to a timeline, but we're hoping that it's something that's, you know, in the near future. And the other thing I wanted to say is our process for the targeted brownfields assessment. So the best thing is it's free, it's high quality work, but it takes us longer. We're the federal government. So from the start of the project until the end, we say, you know, a general time frame of 9 months. Whereas if you were to have an assessment grant, hire a contractor, it's often feasible to do the assessment work on a much quicker turnaround per site than we can do with our government system. But certainly it's worthwhile because it is free and high quality. So I'll hand it off to you again, Jasmine.
Yeah, and I guess just in comparison, you know, if you're choosing between an assessment grant and a TBA, assessment grants seem to be more favorable for larger capacity grant recipients because it is a larger ask. It's also more favorable if you do have several sites that you plan to do assessments on, or that, you know, may go towards a larger redevelopment goal. And it may be more appropriate for those more complex sites that the targeted brownfields assessment program may not have the capacity to deal with because it is for those smaller scale sites.
And we also don't want you to feel restricted. There's no reason that you couldn't apply for both targeted brownfields assessment and an assessment grant. And sometimes our assessment grant recipients ask us to do targeted brownfields assessments and they submit applications. Maybe they have a site that's not eligible under their grant, or they're, you know, kind of coming to the end of the funding and they aren't able to do some additional sites before the grant closes. And so we, you know, again, we welcome all applications for sites that are a good fit from an eligible applicant that would be a good prospect for a targeted brownfields assessment.
Next slide, please. Thank you so much, Jasmine and Lisa. And Lisa and Jasmine will be available of course, for questions that you might have at the end of our presentation. So feel free to, ask them more questions, and you can continue to ask questions in the question box that's available. So I'm really excited now to introduce our success stories, and we're very fortunate to have Florence Kabwasa Green. She's the Capital Improvements Manager for the County of Monterey, California. She's going to be speaking about the Mary Agnes Young Library site that's located in San Lucas, Monterey County, California. And we also have today Marian Cushigan, who's the Vice President of Real Estate Development, Hawaii, for EAH Housing. She's going to be speaking about the site Nahona Hale site, which is located in Honolulu, Hawaii. Next slide. So Florence Kabwasa Green, she's a capital improvements manager with 15 years of experience working with the County of Monterey, California. She currently oversees a team of project managers and real property specialists in the implementation of county projects of various size and scope, and coordinating related project planning and procurement activities. She served as project manager 2 and 3, and she also was the management analyst for the County of Monterey, preparing the county's annual capital improvement program, as well as providing grant administration and advising on county policies and procedures. She was formerly a research associate consulting, conducting research on arts, community development, and planning related initiatives. Projects in which she has played a key role include the Urban Institute's Arts and Cultural Indicators Project, the Artist Space and Community Revitalization Project, and Investing in Creativity, a study of the support structure for U.S. artists. She has co-authored several publications at the Urban Institute, and Ms. Kabwasa Green has also worked on housing and transportation planning issues in the United States, and has been involved in the evaluation of local and community-driven organizations in Senegal and the Democratic Republic of Congo. She has a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics and a Master of Arts degree in urban planning from the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Welcome, Florence, and thank you again for joining us today in this webinar to talk about this wonderful project.
Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you to the EPA team and the C-Clear team for inviting me to share my experience in the development of the San Lucas Library. I call it the little library that could, because it has a long story, but it's now a wonderful community service in San Lucas. Next slide. So just to give you a little bit of background, the community of San Lucas, it's a very small rural community in South Monterey County. And it has been in the library services in San Lucas have actually existed there since 1916. If you ever take the Amtrak Coast Starlight, you actually will be going by the San Lucas Library. So it's been there a long time. And since 1990, it has provided library service by leasing a site that belonged to this San Lucas School District. And right about the 2012 or so, they wanted to take care of some ADA upgrades. And if you can go to the next slide. And in the process of deciding to do some ADA upgrades, we realized that it was going to require a major renovation and reconstruction, and that maybe it made sense to consider building a new library. So as part of our due diligence that we do with all of our projects, we kind of negotiated with the San Lucas School District, who, with the idea of creating a new library, graciously donated the site for $1 to the county. And we did do our due diligence, and we, the county, conducted a phase 1, report. We did that in 2012. And lo and behold, when we did the phase 1, it did identify that there was a history on that site of a former gas station and an auto repair shop. And the phase one actually identified some environmental conditions that had to be further reviewed. So of course, we then had to kind of regroup and see, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean in terms of the budget for creating a library? And it seemed like the timing was perfect. I think I might have seen an email regarding a TBA webinar and reached out to the EPA to see if this particular project might be suitable. And we worked closely with the EPA team, and based on the property, the fact that it has this environmental condition, the fact that we did intend to reuse it as a library, it was a good match. And it was a very good process for us. As Lisa mentioned, it was seamless. It started off with, just kind of a scoping meeting with the EPA team just to go over the project. They provided us a timeline, really, and brought in the experts to review the site. We also worked in conjunction with our local environmental division, so they were involved. It was just nice to see kind of the local environmental team and the EPA team working together to make sure that we get the best outcome for this site. The targeted brownfield assessment did identify high levels of lead in the soil and also possible underground storage tanks that needed to be addressed. So that process really provided us with all of the data in terms of the extent of the contamination, and we received the ABCA that provided us with an array of options for cleaning up the site. Those options range from just encapsulating the site, possibly putting, asphalt over the site, encapsulating it, to a full cleanup where we would be off hauling, I believe, and I have to recall, I believe it might have been up to 4 feet or more. We actually dug out up to 4 feet of the site, and then infilling it with clean soil. And I did want to mention that the site is about 10,000 square feet and the library was about 1,200 square feet on there. So that ABCA was critical for us to understand the magnitude of the environmental contamination there. And it really allowed us to successfully apply and receive an EPA cleanup grant. We worked, we had the information that we received through the ABCA. We also were able to take advantage of the C-Clear technical assistance to help us kind of navigate the application process. And I'm just saying that is because a lot of times in county operations, we're so busy putting out fires, we're so busy dealing with so many projects that when an opportunity like this comes along where we can get that assistance to go after the grant and it's not taking away as much time from us, then it's a win-win. So this was truly a win-win for the county. We were just pleased to receive the EPA grant, and we're then able to secure, with that in mind, we were able to secure more funding and more partners to allow for the library to be open. And so again, the cleanup occurred in 2015, and then we had our grand opening in 2017. And I'll go through some slides just to provide you some visuals at this point. Next slide. So this is just to give you an idea of what the library was like. It was basically a home. It was a home that was being used as a library. That's actually one of the issues I had to deal with, is that we had to get it rezoned. And you can see here from the side, it's really, there's no sidewalks. It's a very rural community. And it's the main hub for the community to go to get library services. Next slide. So here's a sharper picture so you can get a sense of how rural it is. And this was in 2012. Next slide. This is just to give you an indication of the site. This is actually after we received the cleanup grant. So this is a photo of the cleanup in process that I mentioned, the off-hauling of the contaminated soil and bringing in clean soil. Next slide. And again, I mentioned the partnership with EPA. Here's a photo with Lisa that came to the site in San Lucas, and our local environmental official that was involved in the cleanup, obviously. And Lisa came several times, just of course, to check on the site progress. So I just wanted to share that. It's a good picture to give you the size, 10,000 square feet, the size of the site. Next slide. Here's just another look to give you an idea. And it was just really nice to know that we're going to give the community back a site that is just free of contaminants, because it's going to be a library. Kids are going to be playing there. It was just a really good feeling to know that it's just clean. And not only that, but for the county, of course, the recognized environmental condition was removed from the site. So now we have an asset that's free of any environmental conditions. And of course, this is the result of getting the cleanup grant, which was assisted with the TBA from the very beginning. Next slide. This is the library now. This is a photo in about 2017. Just giving you a sense, it is LEED. It may not look like it, but it is LEED certified library. So silver LEED. We have solar on there. We have, meets all of the ADA access, and just a nice, it's in keeping with what was there before. So the community was very much involved in the design. They wanted to stick with the mission style, and they wanted to preserve that rural feel. So this is to give you an idea. Next slide. This is just kind of the back part of the library. Next slide. And so again, I mentioned that we did receive a lot of funding. We were able to leverage funding from not only the EPA grant, but CDBG grants were able to be leveraged. We received funding from the Board of Supervisors, and we also received local funding from a local community foundation, the Monterey Peninsula Foundation, as well as the Sarmento Family Trust. And that is who is named after, the library is named after the Mary Agnes Young Library. She's the matriarch of the Sarmento family, who have deep ties in San Lucas. So that was very nice. And you can see here the photo of just the bustling. It's a small community, like the slide earlier showed, only 500 residents, but wow, at the grand opening, it was really exciting to provide that service to the community. Next slide. And again, it's more than just a library. There is a office that serves as a sheriff's substation. It provides free Wi-Fi service for the community. The community can access employment assistance. There's youth and teen programs that are done in conjunction with the school that's around the corner. And also there's access to services for veterans. So it's a key institution for that small community. And we were just very pleased that we were able to implement this project. Next slide. Finally, I was asked to just talk about some key challenges and successes. I mean, the main challenge, I think, is the time frame. As Lisa mentioned, it's a process, right? So it did take, it took longer than it might have taken if we didn't go through, the federal, assistance program. But as Lisa said, it was offset by the quality of the contractors and consultants that were involved. And in the meantime, the library did continue to provide bookmobile services. I think the key success, for us is that it enabled us to garner all of the community support that I mentioned, leverage funding, because people knew that it's going to, they knew what the outcome was going to be in terms of a clean site and a beautiful place for the community to use. We really appreciated having all the subject matter experts involved, the EPA, the local architect team, and the contractors. And finally, I think the community engagement piece was very successful. We always involve the community, but of course, when you're applying for a cleanup grant or the TBA grant, they really, it's encouraged. You have to have the community engagement. So that was a very successful part, I think, because the community now takes ownership of that facility. That's it. I just wanted to say again that this was a very, very good experience, and I highly recommend any communities that have, you know, a small facility like this to go after the TBA grant. I think it's very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Florence. That was really an inspiring project, I'm sure, and it's really nice to look in the rearview mirror when you do a project like that and see how much it has benefited the community. You can see that with all the pictures that you provided and all the services that are available to the residents in that little community. So thank you for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And of course, Florence will be available for questions when we're done with our presentation. So thanks so much again, Florence. Now I'm happy and very pleased to introduce to you Marian Gushigan. And she is the Vice President for Real Estate Development with EAH, which is EAH Housing located in Honolulu, Hawaii. And she's going to be speaking regarding the I know I'm not pronouncing this right, Nahona Hale project. And briefly, I'd like to give you her background. She has a very impressive background, as does Florence. Marian joined EAH Housing in October 2007, first as the Director of Real Estate Development in Hawaii, and now she is the Vice President. In this capacity, she oversees all development activities for EAH in the state of Hawaii, including the assembly of all financing, subsidy sources, leading projects through acquisition, entitlements, financing, construction, and occupancy. She's been involved in the development of over 1,600 units across 4 counties, with highlights including the first syndicated property in the EAH Hawaii portfolio, and the Kahului Town Terrace, which was 72 units. That was acquisition rehabilitation project, and the presentation of Kukui Gardens, which is 389 units. She also had primary responsibility for the first new construction development of EAH in Hawaii, which is a 194-unit, 3-phase family rental project called the Villages of Moahiku. Did I say that right? Moahiku?
Moahiku, yes.
Prior to joining EAH, Ms. Gushigan worked at the Eden Housing in Hayward, California for over 9 years, first as a project manager and then as the Associate Director of Real Estate Development. As the Associate Director, she oversaw the development of over 1,200 units of rental housing, with the primary project management responsibility for over 400 units developed. Before her tenure there, Ms. Gushigan worked for the city of Hayward as a housing development specialist, working on affordable housing programs and policies, and also at Mid-Peninsula Housing Coalition, another regional nonprofit housing provider based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Ms. Gushigan holds a bachelor's degree in social policy and urban affairs from the University of the Pacific and a master of city planning from the University of California at Berkeley. Thanks again, Marian, for joining us, and I'll pass your presentation on to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about EAH and our work on Nahona Hale, which is one of our showcase projects. It was a lot of fun to work on. So as Cheryl mentioned, it's fun to sort of look back in the rearview mirror to kind of talk about what our experience was. So EAH, very briefly, next slide, please, is a nonprofit organization. We are a property development company and management company. We were founded in 1968 with a corporate office in San Rafael, California. So we work in all of California and Hawaii. We've developed just under 9,000 units across both portfolios, and we also do our own property management, both for ourselves, the work that we do, as well as other third-party owners of affordable housing developments. Next slide, please. So EH came to Hawaii back in 1996 at the invitation of HUD to preserve 2 properties here on Oahu that were at risk of conversion to market rate use. And so with their assistance and a whole team of partners, we were able to preserve close to 400 units at that time. Those properties are still in our portfolio. They've undergone renovation several times, including syndication. And so we're very pleased to have started that work here, and we continue that work through not only preservation, but also new construction, and we're currently working on all 4 islands. Next slide, please. So the project Nohona Hale was actually initiated by the Hawaii Community Development Authority. It's the HCDA, which is essentially our state redevelopment authority. And if you're familiar with Honolulu, this neighborhood is in the Kaka'ako district, which has seen tremendous transformation over the last few decades. It's been primarily mixed use, lots of industrial uses still remain, slowly converting back into residential. And for a significant number of years, there's been lots of new development, primarily with market rate housing, high-end market rate housing that's taken place. So the HCDA wanted to focus their efforts on trying to encourage affordable housing development in their district. This particular site, 630 Cook Street, was one of the last vacant sites that was under their purview in the Kaka'ako district. And so they wanted to see, at that point in time, the state had been talking about the micro-unit typology as a potential way to try to get lots of affordable housing units on a site, in particular infill sites, small infill sites, which this is. So they issued an RFP in 2014 calling for development of a micro unit project, and they loaded on all sorts of goals, green building, transit oriented, smart growth, et cetera, and affordable. So in 2015, we partnered with the Bronx Pro Group out of New York. They had just done a micro unit project as well. And so we were off to the races at that point. Next slide. So as you can see, it's a small parking lot. It was a small parking lot. It served some of the commercial uses right next door. And in the back there, near the parking only sign, there was a small resident garden that served a senior project further down the street. But it was only provided about 20-25 stalls at the time, so very underutilized in a high growth area. Next slide. So we approached the TBA program to help us undertake the work with phase 1 and then subsequently the phase 2. And for such a small site, there are lots of uses both at it and around it that raise some red flags. Part of the site on the north side was, as you can see, a drum storage area, and then a former dry cleaner on site. Yay. Next slide, please. So obviously with those uses, the 2 contaminants of concern turned out to be lead and diesel uses. So as part of the phase 2 assessment, we worked with the consultants with the EPA and the Department of Health to develop a multi-increment sampling protocol. And so I think on this very small site, we had like 60 holes in it to do the soil sampling work. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of the timing, we did the environmental work in 2016 through 2017. At the same time, we paired that with the work that was ongoing with the project as far as our approvals and assembling of financing. So with those 2 studies under our belt, we were also able to then, outside of the TBA program, develop the environmental hazard evaluation and hazard management plan, which are required documents for our Department of Health to get their approvals. So we were able to conduct that. And in 2018, we closed on our construction financing and started construction on the project, which we completed in 2020. So as part of the DOH's process, we needed to also put in place an environmental hazard management plan. So one of the things that the ABCA that was done under the TBA grant helped us to assess was options for dealing with the lead and the diesel on site, right? One was no action. That's a typical option. Of course, not doable. Second was to cap and implement institutional controls. And the third was to completely remediate and remove soils. That was, of course, the most expensive option. And we wound up going with the second one, which was to cap and implement institutional controls. So as you can see, the gray and the white areas are the covered areas. Essentially, the building foundation sits on most of the site. The yellow areas are the exposed garden areas that we were able to incorporate. So those areas which are exposed, about a foot of soil was removed and replaced with clean fill. And so the EHMP is in place and is meant to guide a potential management or exposures going forward during operations of the project. Next slide. So some of the challenges and successes, I think, as was mentioned before, the process can take a little bit more time than, if we were to go out and get our own phase 1 and phase 2 done. But it's manageable as long as, well, for us, it was manageable because we timed it together with the early stage pre-development process that we have to go through anyway. And initially, the lines of communication are a little bit different. I'm used to assembling our team of consultants and dealing with them directly. So this included the EPA as the client of the actual studies. So that once we understood that, it was fine to include everyone in the communications, and so that was smooth. So the outcomes, as a result of TBA assistance, of course, we were able to produce 111 units, micro units, long-term affordable. The sizes of the units are 285 square feet. Each unit has its own lanai. And we're targeting deeply affordable housing. So 30%, we have 11 units serving 30% AMI, that $554 the current rent. And then most of the units serve 60%, oops, sorry, that's a typo, 60% AMI. With rents at just over $1,000. And in the general area, of course, rents for studios can go for double that. And we were able to develop a LEED Gold building, which incorporates many of the amenities that you see there. Next slide. So together with the TBA assistance at the front end, we were able to leverage a 65-year long-term ground lease from the HCDA. And through their sister agency, the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation, we were able to assemble our financing, which consisted of tax-exempt bonds, 4% tax credit equity, and a rental housing revolving fund loan, which is also, it's basically the primary source of gap funding here in the state. And these are some photos. It's total 16-story, 14-story, technically two 14-story towers sit on a 2-story podium, and that podium is where we have parking, all 3 stalls of parking. It's essentially staff parking. And then our offices and most of the resident amenities are on that second deck that you see. So that boxed out area, the cantilevers out over the sidewalk, is part of the outdoor lounge area. And there's some seating you see on the right with the yellow umbrellas. The garden on the bottom you see is in the rear of the building. That was one of the exposed areas that received the new infill. And this is just a photo of one of the interiors This was the first time that we were able to incorporate Murphy beds. So those the wall that you see behind the couch folds down, and there's a bed there. Next slide. So on that second floor level, we also have our resident gardens, and then a picture of our multi-purpose room and the indoor-outdoor kitchen. And we were also able to incorporate, as part of our green building strategy, we have solar thermal on the roof. And then this was the first, as I understand it, the first vertical array of PV. I believe once we completed occupancy, we leased up in 2 months. There were about 750 initial households in the lottery pool. And yeah, we've been occupied since then. Thanks. And I think I will toss it back to Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Marianne. That is another really great success story that serves the community very well. Affordable housing and housing alone is an issue that is impacting all of our communities, and EAH is definitely providing solutions to that issue. So thank you for joining us today, and it's a great project. And again, Marianne will be available after our last slide here to answer any questions you might have. So quickly, how to apply and some helpful web links. We've provided to you in the chat box, as well as on this PowerPoint that will be available after the webinar has concluded. EPA Region 9 Pacific Southwest Targeted Brownfield Assessment website is listed there, as well as the Region 10 Targeted Brownfield Assessment. And if you're not from either one of those regions, please feel free to visit the National EPA TBA information page that will give you information as to your specific region. And of course, CCLAR is always available to provide you free technical assistance. And I would just like to tap Lisa on the shoulder again and ask her to talk a little bit about some important aspects of the application for a TBA when they visit your website.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl. I wanted to just let you all know, to be aware of this, that the way our application is set up, it will not save data. And so what you'll have to do is complete the application in one sitting. But I don't know if this is true of Region 10, but we do have a pre-application checklist. It's a Word document that you can download, and you can compile all the information that you'll need to put into the application before you submit it. And the other thing to know is it's just us in Region 9 that review the application. So it's not like a grant application where, you have to be really worried about providing absolutely everything at once. If you submit the application to us and we have some questions or some of the information is missing, we'll reach out to you. So, the stakes are much lower. We're very happy to continue to receive information and work with you until we have what we need to make a decision about whether the project is a good fit. And we're always available, before you submit an application, to talk with you about projects. So feel free to reach out to me or anyone else on our Brownfields team.
Thanks, Lisa. So last slide, please. Are there any questions of our panelists? Everybody gave such a great presentation with so much information, but I'm sure there's some questions in the chat room or in the question box.
So thankfully, Lisa answered some of the questions that were already in the Q&A box. Thank you, Lisa, for doing that. Yeah, so feel free to raise your hand, and if you have a question, I'll just call on you and you'll be able to unmute yourself, or feel free to put your questions in that Q&A box. Okay, perfect. Okay, Lou, go ahead. You should be able to.
Thank you very much for that amazing presentation. Thank you, ladies, for an amazing presentation. Good morning from American Samoa EPA. My name is Liula Faile. I am the Brownfields Coordinator for American Samoa EPA. Just have a few questions regarding the TBA process. Well, we have it's also good to hear that there's a distinct collaboration between TBA and the Brownfield Assessment Grant that US EPA provides. My question stems from the presentation that the amazing presentation success story that Florence provided via the library that was that whole area that was able to be redeveloped and turned into a library. That was an awesome success story, Florence, and really inspired, given a lot of areas similar to that here in American Samoa that we're looking to redevelop.
Great.
Concerns me is the cleanup funding that you had. I saw that this begun in 2012, and then you had the cleanup up by 2015. I mean, that was quite fast from my point of view to get EPA on board and to get that funding assistance from EPA. Like, did you wait for until you get the results back from the original phase 2 assessment, and then you can apply for cleanup afterwards, or did you apply for cleanup while in the process of waiting?
I think it worked, if I remember correctly, and I can go back. I think it just the timing, it's just kind of the stars aligned. The APCA was completed in time. And then I do remember that I spent all of Christmas, I put in some overtime. I submitted that application during the holidays, I remember. And I do remember that the C Clear team was right there. Whenever I had questions, they were there to assist me, with that application process. It just so happened to line up perfectly. But if I hadn't, I do believe that if I hadn't basically taken the time during the Christmas break to go ahead and work on the application, I probably would not have made it for that cycle, and it would have taken longer. So I really pushed myself to get it in to that cycle. But so my project shows that it is possible, but yeah, it is, I do remember now that I had to push, yes.
And
So,
Lou, you do need to have the investigation completed
yes,
in order to apply for
Yeah.
the cleanup grant, because that's the information that goes into the analysis of brownfields cleanup alternatives, which is a required attachment to the cleanup grant application. And
yes.
I wanted to also say that Florence completed her cleanup project ahead of schedule and under budget. She actually returned funding to EPA because she was so efficient.
Yes.
Awesome.
The other thing I wanted to point out, and I don't know if other communities have that, is the county of Monterey, we have a job order contract program. So we have contractors that we competitively bid and that we have available to bring on. So that helped us a lot for the cleanup.
That Christmas break was a huge sacrifice for you.
Yes, but it was worth it.
It was worth it. Awesome. I think one of those things that Lisa would understand as well, taking over from Noemi in the past, is the difficulty we have on island is limited resources, given the remote location that we have here in the very southeast of the Pacific region here in Pacific region. Given that we are unable to, or having difficulties accessing or procuring contractors to do the work, but we are working around that with Lisa coherently with procuring those contractors for our current projects. One last question for Lisa and our Region 9 team is, do ASTs, above storage tanks in abandoned gas stations, do they qualify under the TBA or any other brownfields grant for assessment and cleanup?
Well,
Lisa?
if there's been a release, and the thing, Lou, also is the eligibility when there's petroleum involved is a little more complicated. So I would say let's talk offline about specific sites to make sure that they're eligible for you.
Gotcha.
Great, thank you so much. So we have another question in the Q&A box from John. They asked, is there a manner to check on a city's past request for EPA assistance? There is a criteria for determination, correct? I believe that may be a question for EPA, but any of the other panelists, feel free to hop in.
I'm not sure I understand what is there a manner to check on the city's past request for EPA assistance? So are you asking about a targeted brownfields, or give me a little bit more information about what exactly you're asking? I'm a little confused by the question. Sorry about that.
This is, oops,
Go ahead, John.
me. My question relates to the criteria for determination. If the city has received past EPA assistance, will they be disqualified?
Oh, not at all. In fact, we kind of like layering our brownfields resources. So we're happy to work with communities on a continuing basis. And there's certainly no reason that it would preclude you from getting future assistance. One thing I will say is with our targeted brownfields assessment resources, we do like to spread the wealth among our region. So, you know, if in a given year you've already gotten assistance, we might want to put it off to a future year, but certainly don't hesitate to apply repeatedly. We're happy to assist.
Great. Thank you for that response, Lisa. John, did that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up? Okay, we'll move on. And John, if anything comes up, feel free to put it in the Q&A chat as well. Thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand or put them in the Q&A box. Okay, it seems like we have answered all of the questions. If anything comes up, feel free to reach out to EPA. Feel free to reach out to Florence and Marion, as well as CClear for any follow-up questions. Oh, I see one just showed up. The question asks, if we received an assessment grant this year, will that affect our eligibility for TBA? I believe Lisa touched upon this a little bit, but go ahead, Lisa.
It will not affect it. We might ask you, why can't you do the work under an assessment grant? Particularly because, you know, sometimes our assessment grantees have funding that extends beyond the 4 years, but it certainly wouldn't disqualify you at all from receiving TBA assistance.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And Linda, I see your question, if someone could connect after the discussion. Yes, CClear can connect you with your appropriate technical assistance provider. I'll be sure to email you after this webinar. Thank you. Any other last minute questions? We have about 5 minutes left. Thank you, Ignacio, for letting Linda know to contact Kansas State University. Okay, so we can wrap up. Again, if any other questions come up, feel free to reach out to any of the panelists, and we'll be sure to include their contact information in the follow-up email. As a reminder, the follow-up email will include the webinar recording as well as the slides and any links to resources regarding TBAs. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to our wonderful panelists for taking the time and developing such a wonderful presentation.
And I want to really thank our panelists, Lisa Hanusiak from EPA, Jasmine Williams from EPA, also Florence Kabwasa Green, and Marion. Is Marion still there?
Yes.
Yep. And Marion Cushigan. Thank you both so much for participating, and thank you so much to Jasmine and Lisa for all your good work. And a big a thank you to Miss Lou Jane for taking care of the back end and monitoring this whole thing. So thank you to our panelists, and thank you to all who joined us today. I hope that this was helpful, and if you have any questions or would like more information, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us, or you can get the slide deck, which will be available on the CClear website after the webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Don't forget, we have a lot of funding available, so submit applications.
Apply,
Yeah,
apply,
way to
apply.
go, Lisa.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a
Thank
good
you,
day.
everyone.